right, so the first presenter is Mr. Reginald Parks with Reality Marketing Group. And for those of you that don't know, Reggie is an MBA alumni from the first group, I believe, right?
Yes.
First group. I think you also came to the university through one of the community partnerships.
Yes,
correct?
the African American Chamber.
Okay. So, Mr. Reginald Parks.
Hey guys, so good morning. Hopefully you guys are having a good morning thus far, learning about leadership and so forth. So yeah, I'm going to speak through, I know I got a short period of time, so I'm going to kind of jog through just business leadership and overall kind of how that particular our leadership in business and the importance of it really leading to not only better business, better interactions with employees and subordinates and so forth, but overall leading to profit and how that ties to profitability, how these things we talked about this morning, some of the culture ties to profitability, specifically in this challenging time, with the way leadership is in some instances, it's not tying to healthy workplaces. It's not tying to anything but more for growing businesses and for developing businesses. It's important that it ties to all that as well as profitability and good outcomes. So just a little bit about myself. She kind of went there a little bit. I graduated from North Carolina State and came down here. I got my MBA here at Hersey. And I'm the lead designer at Reality Marketing Group, a firm. We do, on a day-to-day basis, my specialties are branding, marketing, business development, scalability, and what we're going to talk about today is not only that scalability, but sustainability of employees and so forth. We work, we talked about remote just a moment ago. We work primarily as a remote team within Orlando. Everybody's here in Orlando, and then I have other remotes that I've worked with in different states as well. So it's going to be kind of tied to both of those. So business leadership. I know we've been getting definitions this morning, so that we're going to a business leadership conference, but it's been kind of like a dictionary conference. But we're really going to define business leadership as today. So just business in general is just a practice of, as we all know, just making one's living or engaging in commerce. And then leadership, of course, is the action of leading a group of people in that organization. So together, that's leading a group of people, organization towards capital or ongoing income for that company or business. And I know a lot of people are like, duh, that's what we're here. We know business leadership. We know what all that is. But the thing about it is, as times go on, as we are working with remote individuals, as we are developing our businesses, this particular business leadership is becoming more and more dynamic. And we'll kind of step through that a little bit, redefining it in the way that it's coming as we go from, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. It's becoming more and more dynamic business leadership and how that really leads into business development. So how many of you guys would say, you can kind of, blurt it out or whatnot, because I only have a little bit of time, but how many of you guys would say you've experienced good business leadership, and what were some characteristics of that? Does anybody have to word out some characteristics?
Obviously, having a leader that has clear goals, so you know exactly what
precise
of you and what you're supposed to do.
Okay.
Support.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Training.
Yeah, very important for sure.
I'll speak up and say responsiveness.
Responsiveness, communication. We talked about that in the other room as well. So we talk about good leadership. We talk about responsiveness. We talk about communication, transparency. We talk about a lot of things that we all would agree that are as good leadership. And we'll later on kind of speak to how those particular items have tied to income, have tied to overall growth of businesses and so forth. So, and that's how we're redefining business leadership. And then what are some negatives that you guys have seen within business? You can kind of blurt those out as well. Disorganization. So kind of like the complete opposite of some of the positives that we said. Disorganization, bad communication, bad ethics, morals, and so forth. And as we continue to grow as a society, morals, ethics, and all of that, and even work-life balance and things we talked about in the other room are becoming more and more important in business leadership, and which is ironic of somewhat the reason why we're in some of the troubling times, because none of this is being focused on. So, good business leadership, and that we're now defining it in today's world. So, things are changing clearly in leadership and the leadership dynamic. As companies realize the importance of good leadership, they must approach the simple business leadership model a bit different. The confusion between leadership there is a confusion between leadership and good business leadership. So we talk about, more than just creating, a model in which we generate revenue, but also we talk about company and corporate culture a lot. So we talk about the culture of the company and, people who work for you and defining a vision, defining how the company and the business is really built and really what it leans on, the pillars that it leans on. We talk about inclusive leadership. So we talk about making sure that everyone's involved. We even talked about how we do that in a remote atmosphere in the last session. So we talk about making sure that everyone's included, involved, and a part. And leadership that creates a safe workplace, whether that is remote, whether that is in the normal workspace or traditional workspace, 9 to 5, how that creates kind of that sense of family, that sense of relationship, return on relationships we talk about. And then also just consideration, like considerate of, we talk about working remotely and how that particular, considering the time, considering someone who works from home and also is going to school and some things like that. So all of these particular items we'll tap into a little bit and how important they are and how business leadership is really defined in today's world. So how it ties to profit. We talked about, we're clearly going to step into kind of how all of these items really tie to profitability. We can look at this particular slide and we look at some of the individuals, and even one is in question as far as ethics and things right now, and how they fight, and that will really showcase how they are as a leader and how they handle adversity for one of their heaviest times. But we look at these, and they're literally called the 4. So these are the 4 biggest companies in the world, and these companies are been defined by the way that they handle their employees, by the way they've created these ridiculous company cultures, by the ways that they've been innovative and allowed for people. I think the phrase in the last room was circle the wagons. So they circle the wagons very well. They make sure that everybody comes in and they learn. Zuckerberg literally sits, steps away, or he built a culture of sitting, steps away from everybody who is quote unquote his, subordinate. So that particular,
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no.
Can we go back?
Yeah, you can go back, but we can stay here, it's fine.
Good, because I forget what button takes you back.
It's all good. But we kind of talk about how those individuals really built that trust and the ability for people to not really, or to be, a part of the business. So that's the new company culture or corporate culture. And I'll kind of skip through this one actually. But poor company culture, really, it's very hard to pull out examples of, ways that poor company culture has ever led to, positive outcomes. Like we talk about these 4 specifically because they've led to such great outcomes, and you can implement. You've seen the way they implemented these amazing cultures, these amazing things. But poor examples usually lead to poor, and that's that last slide I was talking about as far as a Forbes study. The importance of leadership in a successful business. We're going to tap into company culture. So Google, as we all know, is known for that open space, the ability to communicate and so forth. And that is where today's business leadership is heading as far as one of the main pillars that we just discussed. I'll just dip into these 4. So when we talk about those, we talk about, things and how they're linked and how they're directly linked. Oh, I was still on, sorry. It's okay.
No, let me see.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. So we talk about how it's directly linked and everything. But as we looked at the individuals on there, we directly linked their success or those companies' success to the C-level, to those people. And that's how it's tying down now. Everything it trickles down. It's a part of that company culture that the individual in the C-level or the leadership, which we're talking about, that business leadership, truly creates within the organization. And then it's just creating a culture of positivity, creating a culture of innovation. And that positivity and that that ability for everyone to be involved creates that innovation. And those are the most innovative companies, and it kind of creates that synonymous, that feeling of startup. When you think about startup, you think about everybody's energetic, everybody's excited. We want to continue to keep that motivation within all of our companies as they continually grow, because we all hope that our companies continually scale and become part of the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 that are in that next picture, the next slide that we're talking about. So it's just acting on that vision. That's the company culture. So we also talked about inclusive leadership, or that's one of the main pillars of business leadership today. So with that being said, I kind of tapped on it a second ago, that circling the wagons, that overall, that making sure that everyone feels as if they're a part wherever they are, remotely or not. So that, and we talk about Facebook when it comes to the way that it's inclusive, the way that the building, the way that everything is designed, the way the company is designed, the way that everyone feels and is a part, no matter their background, no matter their their experience and so forth. We talk about all of that, and that's what really creates that innovation and those things that you would like to have within your company. So, I know I'm kind of speeding through it, but yeah, today's leadership and main thing we talk about also is just adaptability. Today, you can't just be a one-way leader or one different type of leader within business. In order for your business to be innovative, you must be an innovative and adaptable, or a person that's willing to adapt as a leader. That's a big key in today's business leadership. So, talk about coaching adaptability. You see that everyone is from a different background. Everyone's different shapes, sizes, thought processes, which is primarily thought processes is what's going to lead to innovation. The willingness to come together and think through things and sit together and really take and listen. We talked about empathy earlier, and I see Dimitri out there. So we talked about really not only just knowing what they're talking about, but also knowing where they're coming from, and that's what is going to create innovation within your companies on a day-to-day basis. We're a marketing firm, so knowing where people come from, how they think this stuff is what is really going to fuel our ongoing income. We'll go there. So Forbes actually did a study with Zelger Folkman about leadership, with a leadership development firm, specifically going over 50,000 managers is what they kind of analysis, or they did an analysis on, as far as doing, okay, these are what attributes to good leadership versus mediocre leadership versus great leadership. And as you can see within the graph, which I'll just briefly go over, you can see the bottom 10% literally were losing. So when you have poor leadership, you legitimately, within these particular organizations, they were legitimately having poor outcomes. They were losing money, losing millions. So we look at great leadership, we look at some of those executives that we did show up there. Those particular averages were in the positives, in the millions, when they were examined by their subordinates, by those who they were leading. That allowed for you to see, and when they were evaluating, like the comfortability with working, how they, their leadership skills towards them, how they work remotely, and so forth. So literally, these particular 4 elements has led to positive outcomes, to millions of dollars being made within these organizations. So it's only makes sense that we implement these particular things going into the future, trying to change these negative times into some positive times for our own businesses and our business outlook. But yeah, so with that, our takeaways as far as business leadership, just company culture. Make sure that you're definitely thinking about your overall company culture, the overall way that your employees, subordinates, other teammates, relationships that you're building, and so forth, are truly, being captivated or being a part of the way the organization is, not just some line items on the wall. I know we talked about that in the room. They actually living by those pillars. Inclusive leadership, making sure that everyone is a part of the ongoing process of building the business. Leadership that creates a safe workplace, whether that be remote. When I say safe workplace, I really mean like a home, a second home for people to think, for people to be open to discussions about the business, open to discussions about positives, negatives, feedback, things like that are definitely important. And just being a considerate leadership, considering those around, being empathetic, being thoughtful, and always, being there for your employees wherever they are, or those who you are leading. And that's what really kind of fuels a leader in today's world. So, with that, we're going. We're leading into the future. We have to be, leader. We have to be a business leader, Power Rangers, essentially, and lead into the future. There's all my information, and definitely check this out. If you want the slides or anything, or any kind of just to look back at, I'll have the presentation up there as well. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Look at that. I think you were like exact at 15 minutes. That was awesome.